What up, Facebook? What up, men? Hello to all the people that are watching live tonight. Welcome to Man Up Friday here with Mike, your mentor. That would be me, and this would be my page. And this is where we discuss things pertaining to manhood and mentorship and becoming a better man, right? Answering that higher calling that's on our lives as husbands, as fathers, as members of our community, as employees or employers, right? As men, we have a certain role that we play in each of those areas of our lives, and we need to accept the responsibility that comes with those roles and start to start to accept that, right? Those responsibilities, and reject the passivity that naturally comes in those roles as well if we're going to live a fulfilling life and we're going to get the most out of that calling that's been placed on our lives, whether you believe it's fair or not, right? It's just the mantle that we've been given by God, and it's something that society is dying for us to step back into in an honoring way, and that can look like a lot of different things, and we talk about those things here on this channel. So a brief recap if you're new to this page, right? A little bit about my story is I grew up without a father. He was in and out of my life, and I went through some very hard times dealing with that, accepting the rejection that came with that, and growing up wanting to feel chosen, and that drove me into different things. It drove me into sports to get that praise and those accolades, and to just try to really make my father proud, and hoping that my efforts through sports would make my dad want to be more of a part of my life, which really wasn't the reality, and I didn't learn that until I was older and wiser. Went through some other difficult things that I've shared on this page. My brother committed suicide when I was a sophomore in college. My dad died 2 years later of liver cancer. I almost blew up my marriage, and I've been steadily trying to rebuild that for the last 10 years, right? So all these things have happened in my life, and I was just reflecting one day and thinking, why was I able to be born into the situation that I was born into, go through all these things in my life, and continue to persevere, continue to overcome, when so many people, especially men, right? Like, we stuff these things down inside us and we don't acknowledge it, and then we live desperate lives where we're just crying out for attention, and we're crying out for recognition and respect, but we don't know how to get it in a healthy way. And God showed me, it was God's grace on my life, right? I was fortunate enough that God every day, made sure that I had food, made sure that I had a roof over my head, that I had clothes on my back, and I acknowledge that without Him I wouldn't be here today. And two, the mentors that He placed in my life, whether they were in books that I was reading, when I was 12, 13 years old, trying to figure this thing out, in looking in all these different places to find out what it means to really be a man, and the guys that were placed in my life that served as role models for me, that saw something in me and invited me into their homes to spend time with them and their families, and see how they interacted with them, how they loved on their wives, how they loved on their kids, how they made a difference in society. And I know what it's like to be at your bottom and not knowing where to turn or what to do, and just needing somebody to see that and be willing to reach their hand out and say, hey man, I understand, I got you, take my hand, we'll do this together, right? We'll do life together, we'll be real, we'll be honest. And that was very important for me, and that made a huge difference in my life and in my marriage. And I recognize that, and I see so many men today being beat down, not only in society, but just personally, emotionally, mentally. I talk with men all the time. I meet with men one-on-one through my interactions with some volunteering that I do. And we've lost our identity as men and what it really means to be a man. And a lot of that comes because there in Western society there is no rite of passage for men. Like, we're left to figure it out on our own. And if we didn't grow up in a good home where that was modeled for us, that can be a very tough thing to figure out. And oftentimes we'll turn to vices, pornography, drugs, alcohol, all, being over aggressive, all these things that we think we need to do to feel like a man and to make others, say, hey, that's a man over there, when really we know and they know that it's a bunch of BS. But a lot of times we're not willing to call each other out on it. And we size each other up, and we say, oh, my job dictates I'm a man, the position I have, the amount of money that I make, the number of women that I've been with, all these false things, right? So this channel is about me just sharing the wisdom and the things that I've learned over these years, because you don't know what you don't know. And I thought that I could be a man and I could be a good husband just by not doing the things that my dad did growing up, and everything else would take care of itself. Well, that was wrong, because this thing called manhood, this thing about being a father and a husband, right, is a steady progression. And if you're not invested in learning what that looks like and actively seeking it out on your own, it's not just going to happen, right? You got to take initiative, and that's what this page is all about. So we're going to jump into tonight's content. Man Up Friday. First, I got to pay respects to where I learned this stuff from, and that was going through The Quest for Authentic Manhood by Robert M. Lewis. This is all his material. This is not mine, but I can't express the impact that this made on my life at a time where, like I said, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know if I wanted to be married, and there was a lot of stuff going on in my world where the enemy was just coming against me and just beating me down left and right. And through God's providence, I came across this men's group in my church, and these guys, and they were real guys. They were vulnerable, they were honest, and they talked about how hard marriage is, how hard life can be sometimes, and how we can help each other out, and there's no shame in letting our weaknesses be known. It's actually the opposite, which is when we share and we're vulnerable, that's showing true strength, and others see that, and it's attractive, and they want that, and they want to know, how do you carry yourself like that? What does that look like? And I can't overestimate the profound lessons that I learned from going through this, and that's why I committed to doing this with anybody that wants to join me on this page, right? So every Friday for all of 2019, I'm breaking this content down and sharing it with you, and hoping that you're paying attention and taking notes, and that this stuff is, not only getting in your head, but it's getting in your heart, so that you can walk it out and you can make a difference in your life, in your marriage, in your relationship with your kids. This is good stuff. So here we go tonight. Let's jump in. Actually, let me just take care of this second. Alright, there's that. Alright, so we're going to title this week Making a Healthy Break with Mom Part 1. Next week will be Part 2. This week is kind of a high-level look at this subject, and then next week we'll actually get more into the tactical things that you need to do to make this happen in your own life if you're dealing with the mother wound. And I've shared this before, I had a huge father wound, but I also had a little bit of a mother wound that I needed to deal with, right? So this picture is my mom there in the background, and then you got me up front, my brother in the middle, and then my sister in the back. And mom, she worked and did the best that she could on her own to raise 3 kids, whether that was working sometimes 2 or 3 jobs and being gone all day and coming home exhausted, and having to make dinner and laundry and do all this other stuff. And she found a way to do it despite, excuse my language, all the hell we gave her as kids, or or I did at some times, especially through some of my teenage years, and I was very angry at my mom because I thought she was the reason that my dad didn't want to be in my life. And I blamed her. And when I was older, and I realized that I had it backwards, and it really wasn't my mom's fault. It was my dad's fault. My mom tried everything that she could to make things work. She went over and above to try to make things work. I had to apologize to my mom, and we had to have some serious talks about that. And there's a way that you can go about that that's honoring of your mother. And we'll talk about those things in more detail next week. So I just wanted to give you a little context to where I'm coming from. I know what it's like to deal with this wound. So we got a quick review from last week. The legs of manhood are established in the home. So basically what this means is, right, like what you see in your home portrayed as manhood is what you're going to take out into the world when you're out on your own. And if you've never looked back on your life and tried to connect the dots between what happened in your house and what happened as you were growing up and how it affects you today as a man, you're not going to change, and you're not going to move into a better place of healthiness in those different areas of your life, whether it's your marriage, whether it's your relationship with your kids, whether it's your relationship with your friends, whether it's being a productive member of society. You're not going to be able to do that until you look back and address these things that came in your childhood, right? It's not, if you had bad stuff happen to you, right? It's not saying that, it's not making excuses for those things, right? Or saying that those things are okay. But what it is doing, is taking the power away from those things that they have and they've held over your life, the shame, the guilt, right? And it's bringing that out and addressing those things. And, as a picture, right, it's taking those things off your back so you're not carrying them anymore, and setting them down and walking away from them and choosing to have a better life. And the freedom that comes from that is extremely powerful if you're just willing to face these things. And I know it can be tough because I had to do it myself as well. And sometimes there's a lot of tears and there's a lot of emotion, and it's hard to go back there. But, it's the promised land is on the other side of those things, right? Once you can make that journey, it's just incredible, the freedom that you experience in your life. So the legs of manhood are established in the home. And then we want to give a quick definition to the mother wound, and that's an unhealthy emotional relationship with mother that causes a son to either be threatened by the influence of women later on in life, or to identify and become submissive to that influence. And it's interesting because we could see how this plays out in society in a multitude of different ways. But one of the ways that that just struck me, and not to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but, for a long time, I think that in society, a lot of men have been threatened by the influence of women in the workplace. Now, there's a lot of different reasons that women choose to go to work or have to go to work, right? And we've talked about some of those reasons in earlier episodes of this because of where society is and how the family role has adjusted. But I'm just reminded of this as I see some of the posts on the various social media platforms, that women are crying out for, fair play or fair pay in the workplace. And I'm not here to debate whether that's a reality or not, right? I think that there's honor in acknowledging things that people are saying or asking you to pay attention to, and then investigating them for your own. But I think even more, that's a clear reflection of the threat that men have felt from women going out there and trying to earn a living and make their way in the world, especially the business world. So just leave it at that. So there's two major consequences that come from having this unhealthy mother wound in your life. One, as a son, you can become overly passive in regards to women and not really know where your place is or how to navigate uh, those relationships. And you know, this was me, right, to some extent. I would let, I think back to my teenage years, I would let the girls in my life, my girlfriends, I would let them walk all over me. Man, this is crazy. I would never really put my foot down unless I got super, super mad, right? And every time I get to that point, I shouldn't say obviously, I would feel bad about having to come to that point. And the crazy thing is right, is I would punish myself in some way for feeling like that when I shouldn't be punishing myself for letting people walk all over me and then finally deciding to do something about it and put my foot down. But that definitely came out of a place of this wound, right? It created this wound, and along with the father wound, created this void in my inside of me of wanting to be chosen. And I went to my girlfriends and girls at that age to get that feeling of being chosen, right? This healthy need. I saw out unhealthy ways to have that fulfilled. And as long as I was feeling like that from my girlfriends and stuff, then I would put up with a lot of, I guess, BS and try to some of the links I went to try to prolong the relationships as long as I could, because I was also dealing with a lot of fear of rejection, and I didn't want to be rejected or come with or deal with those feelings that come when someone breaks up with you. So I became extremely passive in regards to women. The other thing is, a subset of this is, you can become a soft male, where you, and I hinted at this a little bit, you turn to like fantasy and pornography, which you have these healthy desires, right, of being chosen and wanting to be in those type of relationships, but you're expressing that in unhealthy ways. The next thing is, you have a feminized male, where you can be very feminine in your energy and not really know how to tap into that masculine energy that's inside yourself. And when you enter into marriage, these things carry over, and you become a passive husband. And there's literally been times where you know me and my wife will not see eye to eye in things, and to keep the peace, I'll just roll over. But then, to be honest with you, I'll have I'll come to this point where it's like, no, like I'm being too passive in this. Whoa, hey, I'm being too passive in this instance, and even if the outcome is gonna hurt a little bit, I need to move forward and I need to put my foot down and I need to, you know, uh, make myself known and not just roll over. Right? It's part of being in a healthy relationship, being able to express yourself and your true desires and what you need in a healthy manner, and having the other person acknowledge that, and also giving them the opportunity to do the same. So the second major consequence is sons can become overly dominant in regards to women. On conquering masculinity takes place, and this plays out in a lot of different ways. And in extreme cases, it leads to domestic violence and rape because men don't have good, healthy emotional boundaries that stem out of the relationship with their mother. You know, another way is they have fierce independence, right? No one's going to tell them what to do. It's going to be, I think of my grandpa, right? It's going to be my way or the highway, and then they're afraid of being vulnerable, right? That's where this all stems from. They're afraid of showing people that weakness is the wrong word, but they're afraid of showing people that they're vulnerable or that they have emotions going on. I guess weakness is the word that I'm looking for, inside of us, things that shame, guilt, they're afraid of expressing that. So they put on this mask like a lot of men do. Been there, done that. And we lie to ourselves and we lie to others. And one way that we lie to others is we overcompensate, right, in who we are, in our bravado, in our masculinity, and all that does is it ends up hurting us and it ends up hurting other people. And the crazy thing is right, men can see a poser from a mile away, but yet we still do it, right? We know this guy's faking it. We know this isn't real. And is it because it's socially polite to just let them get away with it so we don't call them out on it, because we want to be the nice guy, and I'm just spitballing here. I don't know the answer, but I just find that interesting. So we talked about how this leads into being a very dominant husband, right? So you have these two extremes, the passive side, and then you have the dominant side. And if you remember back to our 4 faces of manhood, right, how these things play out, right, and how we're supposed to be balanced between those 4 faces, but when we become unbalanced, we get skewed one way on those, to the left or to the right. So we also got to remember that this wound is extremely difficult, and the reason it's so difficult is because it's one of inattention and over attention, right? Like, the relationship between a mother and a son is extremely strong. And it's strong because, your mother carried you around in her womb for 9 months, right? And then you were born, and then there was the first of 2 breaks. There was a physical break, right? The cutting of the umbilical cord. And the importance, whether we recognize it or not, later on in our lives, we definitely don't as babies, but the significance of that event, right, and how powerful it is. It's so powerful that some women even have, they go into postpartum depression after the baby is born because of that bond, right? And as men, we can't even begin to understand what it would be like to carry something around inside of us for 9 months, to love it, and to give it all this attention, and then to have that physical separation happen, right? So after that physical separation happens and we're nurtured, right, and raised primarily by our mothers, they have our best interest in mind. In that bond, that was emotional and physical, right? Physical lessens a little bit, but that emotional bond continues to grow, right? Because mom is taking care of us, right? She's our primary caretaker. And the difficulty of this wound is it's disguised as love and care, but it feels like control, especially as we get older and we find ourselves in our teenage years and we're trying to become our own man and make a way for ourselves. And mom is, I can't speak for a mother, but I can speak to the situation, right? Moms are still trying to exert their control because they're having to navigate this new, what this new relationship could possibly look like between mom and son moving forward. And that can be very difficult at times, right? To let go and to let a man enter into his manhood, right? And we talk about this all the time. Only men can bestow manhood on other men, just like only women can bestow womanhood on other women. So these things are complicated, especially when you grow up in a house without a father, right? Or you grow up in a house where there's not a strong, healthy male presence. So Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the life of Jesus and how he interacted with his mom. And it's going to kind of set the stage and show us some examples here, but set the stage for what's coming next week, which is how we move forward into to the tactical level of healing this actual wound. So the first example is, Jesus gives us some relational clarity on how to deal with our moms, and that's found in Luke 2:43 through 50. So put this verse up here. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." Right? So here we got this situation where they all go to the temple, the parents leave somehow, and Jesus is left behind, whether he did it intentionally or not. And the parents move forward and they realize, hey, something's not right here. It's kind of like Home Alone. And they realize Jesus is missing, so they go back to the temple and he's sitting there, being taught and teaching in the temple. And his mom, obviously, as any mother would be, anxiously approaches him and wants to know why he treated them like that. And his response is, "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Right? So what this example shows us is it shows us that first break in Jesus' life of breaking away from being under his mother's direct care. Right? This is the first instance of him having that inkling that comes to every boy where they want to start to step outside the nest and begin to spread their wings. Second one is social clarity, and that's found in John 2:1 through 4. So on the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there too, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to them, "They have no more wine." So Jesus' response to his mom was, "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." Oh, I typed that wrong. So what this shows us is actually Jesus is standing up to his mom, right? This is the first instance of him doing that in his life, right? And there comes an instance in all of our lives as men where we're trying to get free and make that physical separation or that emotional separation away from mom and go out on our own, and we have to decide to put our foot down and stand up to our mothers. And we'll get into the more specifics of that next week and what that looks like and how you handle that with honor. Third is spiritual clarity, and that's Matthew 12:46 through 50. It says, while Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brother stood outside wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside waiting to speak to you." He replied to him, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother and sister, or is my brother and sister and mother." So basically in this situation we have his mother send someone to get Jesus and he doesn't go, right? Jesus is making his own decisions for himself. Man, I think back to the time when I had to start making my own decisions for myself, or I felt I did, which is roughly around the age of 16. And that was not easy for me, and that was definitely not easy for my mom. And as a consequence, we not only butted heads, but got into a little bit of a wrestling match on one particular instance. So definitely not an easy thing putting your foot down and trying to move forward. All right, so the last example is healthy ending, and this is found in John 19:25 through 27, and it really shows the heart that Jesus had towards his mom and is modeling, our responsibility as sons, even as we step away towards our mothers. So near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. So, here we have Jesus. He's 33 years old, right? I mean, physically, he's definitely a man, and he's being crucified. And he's showing his mom, who's at the foot of the cross looking up at him, that he's a man. He's taking on this responsibility, right? Because that's what men do. They take responsibility for things. And not only is he taking responsibility, for that situation, but he's taking responsibility for his mother. And he's placing his mother in the hands of the beloved disciple. And he's making sure that his mom will be taken care of for the rest of her life, whatever that looks like. And that's a very honoring way that Jesus does that and models that for us as men, to make sure that our mothers are taken care of, right? I remember, oh no, actually I won't talk about that. That wouldn't be right. But it makes me think of, right, our moms brought us into this world. We're very fortunate, and it's our duty as kids, especially as men, to make sure that we take care of our parents, our mothers, our grandmothers, in their older age, and we help them out with that. So that's it for tonight. Just a little bit of a review and some other things. But next week we're really gonna dial this in and get tactical. And I'm gonna talk about how I was able to transition this mother wound with my own mother, and give you a practical example of that. And then we're also gonna have some other practical examples of how you go about navigating that, right? Because whenever we're dealing with any of these wounds, we want to do it very responsibly, not only for the other people involved, but for ourselves. And we want to do it with honor, once again, for the other people involved and for ourselves. So I appreciate you guys checking out this live. I appreciate you watching the replay when you do it. Please, these videos are getting a lot of views, and it's not so that I can be famous or get people's praise. It's simply so that we can help each other out, right? Because as guys, we all know we got a lot of stuff going on inside, and because of social conditioning, we're not speaking out and talking about hard things. And we all need somebody in our lives that we can trust, that can be that can listen, right? And that can hear what we have to say without judging us, so that we're able to unpack these things and to get rid of the guilt and the shame that the devil would rather have us walk around and carry each and every day. So I hope you have someone like that in your life. If you don't, I encourage you to go out and find somebody and build that relationship. You're always welcome to DM me, and I'll be more than happy to listen and to come alongside you and to do life with you, right? I'm just a real dude, because I've learned that there's no point in faking it, right? It's worthless. It's a worthless exercise. And life is so much better just being who you are and just being real. The good, the bad, and the ugly. right? Now, obviously, there's the way that you go about that. There's a time and a place, but I don't know. That's just who I am, and that's just what I hope for other people, because I see the difference that makes in men's lives and the freedom that they get. So, I love you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow for Shout Out Saturday. Have a good night.